Hi, I'm Lance Hendrickson. You're watching Bryan Lomax's Movie Talk. Don't turn it off.
Hello there, and welcome to the second part of my run through all the Marvel Cinematic Universe villains. I'm looking at the villains from Phase 1 and Phase 2. So that's all of the villains from the first Iron Man film up until Avengers Age of Ultron. Now, in my previous video, I counted down the first 20 in my list, so that was number 35 to number 16, and in this one, I'm going to be counting down my top 15. Number 15 is King Laufey from Thor. I really like Laufey because of his design. I think he looks really cool. He looks very imposing. He looks kind of demonic in some ways, with those red eyes and the weird horns. Somewhat sympathetic as well, because in the film, Thor kind of goes marching into his realm. In many ways, starts the fight himself. On some levels it's debatable as to whether he's a villain, but he's a villain for Thor, and he's a very good one, a very sympathetic one, I think. And number 14 is Nebula. Now, Nebula is really in Guardians of the Galaxy, I think, just to have a female villain who can go up against Gamora. I'm fine seeing two kung fu kicking women going at each other on film, but really you get the sense that that's her main reason for being there. Karen Gillan gives an okay performance. I so far haven't seen anything from this actress to really warrant much hype. The design of Nebula is quite interesting. I like it, and I like the physical threat that she poses to the team. Out of the villains in Guardians of the Galaxy, she probably is the one with the most character development. That's not saying a right lot, but it makes her the most compelling villain of that film. At number 13, we have twin brother Pietro Maximoff, otherwise known as Quicksilver. Now, I know a lot of you are going to be saying he isn't a villain, he turns out to be a hero at the end, but in the first half of Avengers Age of Ultron, he is a villain. He does a lot of villainous things. He takes on the Avengers, he punches Captain America in the face quite happily, and he wants to do a lot of nasty stuff to Tony Stark, because he blames Stark for the military tech that basically destroyed his hometown and killed a lot of his loved ones. So yeah, when they start out, him and his sister, at the beginning of Age of Ultron, they are villains, and while they're villains, until they become heroes, I think they're quite compelling. They have a good backstory. I sympathise with their motivations, and yeah, so there's a lot more character development there than we're used to. So yeah, a good character, a good strong villain who eventually becomes a hero. At number 12 is Ulysses Klaue. I really liked this villain simply because of the performance by Andy Serkis. He doesn't do a right lot in the film. We only get one or two scenes with him, but I like the performance. Serkis injects a lot of humour into him. We get the sense that he's a real badass because he's not afraid. He knows that the Maximoff twins are there to intimidate him, but he's not intimidated at all, and he even makes a joke about his fear. At number 11 is Obadiah Stane, otherwise known as the Ironmonger. One of the reasons that this character works so well is simply because of Jeff Bridges. Now, if there's one thing that Marvel has done well, despite not always having the best motivated villains, the best motivations for their villains, character development in them, the one thing they have done well is casting them, and Jeff Bridges is a fantastic actor. And at the time when Iron Man came out, bearing in mind Marvel didn't have a cinematic universe back then, this was a big get. This was to get Jeff Bridges. This guy had been nominated for awards. He was a well-respected actor, still is a well-respected actor, so to get him on board was quite an achievement. Up until this point, we'd never seen him like this. The way he just shaved his head completely and grew that big beard. He looks really menacing. His voice is really menacing. And yeah, he's an interesting villain, although towards the end of the film, we do get into a little bit of the Transformers kind of mentality, which is to be expected. You see Iron Man, you've got to expect that at some point he's going to go up against someone else in another Iron Man suit. But I can at least buy the motivations of the character. This is a man who has essentially helped Tony Stark build this company. Tony Stark, in his mind, is kind of going off the rails a bit, and so he wants to take over. doesn't necessarily condone his methods, but you get a sense of his motivations. You understand why he does what he does. At number 10 is Justin Hammer. Now, Justin Hammer is kind of along the same lines as Obadiah Stane. He's a businessman. He's basically a competitor for Tony Stark in that sense. He does the same things that Tony Stark does, only nowhere near as well. That's one of the beautiful things about this character. It's the humour that comes out of him, and Sam Rockwell plays it to the hilt. I love Sam Rockwell in pretty much anything, and he's really funny as Justin Hammer. You get the sense that he's always trying to be Tony Stark. He's always trying to get one up on him, and maybe in some ways has a bit of a man crush, even though he doesn't want to admit it. But yeah, he's a compelling villain, although maybe not the most threatening. At number 9 is Wanda Maximoff, otherwise known as the Scarlet Witch, and played by Elizabeth Olsen. Elizabeth Olsen does really well in this role, and there's certain horror elements as well to this character. Obviously, with her being a witch, Joss Whedon plays into that during Age of Ultron. He uses certain techniques that we've kind of seen in horror films to play up that aspects of the character, but I just like her performance and I like her power. She's very menacing. She gets into the heads of all the Avengers. Anyone who knows the comic books will know that she becomes an Avenger herself, but for the first half of the film at any rate, she is a villain. She goes up against the Avengers. She really tears them apart in many ways. And yeah, I like the performance, I like the design of the character, I like the way that her powers are used. A really good, compelling character. At number 8 is Emil Blonsky, who becomes the Abomination and is played by Tim Roth in The Incredible Hulk. What I like about this guy is that he's an aging soldier. He's an obsessed man, he's a committed man, he loves doing what he does. He's all about the sport, he's all about being the best. It's debatable as to whether or not the reason he turns bad at the end is because he always is that way, or because the serum that he's injected with kind of brings that more out of him and twists him. But either way, it's good to see the transformation. We get a gradual transformation throughout the film as his body's changing. We get to see him have a fight with the Hulk in human form as well before he becomes the Abomination. And yeah, so when he does become the Abomination, he's a physical threat for the Hulk. And number 7 is Aldrich Killian. Now, a lot of people don't like this character. They feel, I guess, let down by the fact that the Mandarin was a dupe and this guy is just some business guy, really. But I like this character. I like the way he's played by Guy Pearce. I think possibly at the beginning, when we see him as his geeky self, maybe he overplays that a little bit. On the whole, once we come to the present and we see him in his kind of suave, kind of businessman-like persona, I like that guy. I like the way he's played, and he's a threat. He's both a mental and a physical threat for Tony Stark. Intelligent in a way that maybe Justin Hammer wasn't, and also more physically threatening than Obadiah Stane. So yeah, a good villain for Iron Man, I think. At number 6 is Ivan Vanko, otherwise known as Whiplash. Whiplash appears in Iron Man 2, and the second half of that film, admittedly, is not great. Now, for me, I really like Whiplash. I like the way that Mickey Rourke played him. He gets some real badass scenes towards the beginning, towards the middle of the film, particularly the race car sequence. After his meeting with Tony Stark, after that fight sequence, they have a meeting when he's in cuffs. I think after that meeting, he shouldn't have come back in that film. He'd served his purpose. He'd showed that a god can bleed, so to speak, when he takes Tony Stark down at the race. And for me, that's where they should have left him. And after that, Justin Hammer should have just taken over as the villain, the only villain left in that film. So up until that point, the halfway point in Iron Man 2, Whiplash is a standout villain. He's just not afraid of death. He's not afraid of being hurt. He wants to hurt Tony Stark. He wants to hurt Iron Man. And he's prepared to put his life on the line to do it. And when Iron Man takes him down, he's laughing. He's on the floor in bits. People have to drag his body away, and he's laughing and he's shouting at Tony Stark, "You lose, you lose," because he's achieved what he set out to do. Even though he doesn't have superpowers, he's a very menacing character. Speaking of no superpowers, we have Alexander Pierce at number 5. Pierce is played by Robert Redford, a heavyweight when it comes to acting, so to get him for a film like this, for a comic book movie, was really quite a coup. This is a guy who wants world peace. He's just prepared to go about some very dubious means to get it. He's now the head of Hydra, and yeah, it's an interesting character. Number 4 is the Winter Soldier. This is Captain America's old friend, his old war buddy, Bucky Barnes. He's been experimented on, and he didn't even know he was still alive. He assumed he was dead, but he comes back in quite a big way as this villain. And as this villain, as the Winter Soldier, he's a real badass. He doesn't say much, and one of the downsides of the character is really that he's kind of a lackey. He's a zombie in effect. He's been programmed by Alexander Pierce, and for that reason he would be higher on this list. He'd probably be number 1 on this list, quite frankly, if there was a bit more intellect there, if he was in control more of his own thoughts. But because he is essentially a programmed hitman, he doesn't quite get as high on this list. That being said, the look of this character is really cool. I really like the arm, I really like the mask that he wears, and obviously with the darkness around his eyes, he's obviously gone through a lot. The human element of this character, because he is Steve Rogers' old friend, it adds a lot more pathos to the role, to the character. It adds you're kind of rooting for him to regain his humanity, to regain who he was, and he's obviously a very imposing physical threat in the film. He takes down Nick Fury at one point, so that's, again, it's a badass move, and we see that he means business. And number 3 is Ultron. Now, anyone who's seen my review of Avengers Age of Ultron will know that my opinions weren't that high of the character, particularly with regards to his motivations, why he was doing not necessarily the things that he did, but the way in which he did them. Now, I saw that film at a midnight showing and came back and did my review, and I think I missed a few things in that film actually, and I've been back to see it since, and a lot of the questions that I was left with at the end of that film actually got answered on a second viewing. There were things that I missed, and because of that, I kind of have a bit more respect for this character now. I enjoyed the character of Ultron a lot more the second time around, and I understood him a lot more the second time around. And I like his childlike nature. I like that he is almost a child of Tony Stark. He has a lot of power, but he's very young, so he doesn't know how to use that power in the right way. I like James Spader as well. The voice for Ultron is absolutely fantastic. The nuances in it, I love what Spader does with the voice. And a lot of people have complained about the jokes, the sense of humour that Joss Whedon gave to Ultron. But I really liked it. Again, second time around, a lot more than the first time around. So yeah, really good villain, really compelling character. At number 2 is, well, most people's favourite, I think, is Loki. Now, he doesn't quite get the number 1 spot on this list simply because a lot of the time he isn't always a villain. He is a villain, he's clearly a villain. He tried to take over the world in the first Avengers film, but so many times he kind of redeems himself, and that's one of the beautiful things about this character. It's one of the compelling things about this character, is that he does flip-flop so much. He wants to be a hero, he wants to be a good guy deep down, but he's the god of mischief, isn't he? So there's always going to be something, some scheme that pulls him away from doing the right thing. Primarily, the reason this character is so good is the performance of Tom Hiddleston. Tom Hiddleston has owned this role. He's really taken it on and loved it. You can tell he loves this character. And yeah, so I look forward to seeing more of him in the future, as we obviously will. He's Thor's brother, and the way we were left at the end of Thor: The Dark World, he's clearly coming back, and I'm very happy that he is. And so that leaves my number one villain, and anyone who's been paying attention will probably already have guessed who it is, knowing that he's not come up already on this list. And the number one villain is, for me personally, the Red Skull. Now, I really like Hugo Weaving. Any role Hugo Weaving does, he brings a certain sense of gravitas to it. There's something about that guy's voice, the way he enunciates, the way he speaks his lines is just like, it's unlike any other actor out there. I like the makeup they've used, what they've done with that makeup. This is a character that, quite frankly, could have looked really hokey. Anyone who's seen the 1990s version of Captain America would know exactly what I'm talking about. But he doesn't. He looks good. He looks menacing. He looks frightful in a way. The way his nose is kind of just, it's gone a little bit Michael Jackson, and it's just, yeah, he looks fearsome. And ultimately, he's just a badass. He's physically threatening to Captain America. They're both kind of equal when it comes to power. And yeah, so that's it. That's my favourite villain of the MCU, and I do hope that he returns. I know that Hugo Weaving is adamant that he doesn't want to. He is contracted to, so if Marvel did want to basically order him to come back, they could. Obviously nobody wants to get to that situation, so if they have to recast, then fair enough. But personally, I would love to see Hugo Weaving come back to this role. So there you go, that's the end of part 2 of my complete run through and ranking of all the villains in the MCU. That's from phase 1 and phase 2 at any rate. Now, if you agree with my choices or disagree, please comment below and let me know. And tell me, who is your favourite villain from the MCU, and also who is your worst, who is your least favourite. Until next time, thanks for watching. Oh, man alive.